If you are the administrator of a Linux server, whether it be a virtual server, a physical server, security is extremely important. And there's not any one thing that you can do to make your server bulletproof, and to be honest, there's no such thing as a bulletproof, unhackable server, but everything you do adds another layer of protection. In a previous video, I showed you guys how to better secure your OpenSSH server, because let's face it, that's a very common way for Linux administrators like us to remotely maintain and manage our environments. In this video, I want to show you guys how to add another layer of security to your server that I think is going to further complement that. So if you haven't already checked out my video on OpenSSH and how to better secure it, I'll put a card right about here that will give you a link to watch that video. In this video, it doesn't require that you've already watched that one, but again, every additional layer of security that you add to your server is going to help. And this time we are going to check out Fail2ban, which is going to add additional protection for your Linux server. So here on my laptop, I am logged into my Linode console because I created a cloud server specifically for this video. You don't have to be using Linode though, because nothing I'm going to show you in this video is specific to that platform, but they are an awesome provider of cloud services and a valued sponsor if you are looking for a solution for cloud hosting. But whether you are maintaining a cloud server or a virtual machine, what I'm going to show you in this video will apply. To get started, I am going to need to SSH into this server. I have the IP address for it right here, so I'm just going to copy that to my clipboard and we're going to SSH into that server so that we can get started. So here I have a terminal ready to go, so I'm just going to SSH into that server. I'm going to use root for my username. That's very common when you have a cloud server that they use the root user account. Your configuration may vary. If you have installed your server from scratch, then you probably have your own username. And then I'll simply paste in the IP address, which you see right here, and we should be good to go. I'll confirm that, type in my password, and there we go. I am now connected to the server that I'm going to be using as an example in this video. So on this instance, I am running Ubuntu 18.04. You don't have to be running Ubuntu server or any particular distribution. The only thing that might change is maybe the default config file, but we're still installing and configuring the same thing regardless. If you are running some flavor of Ubuntu or Debian, then everything I show you in this video will probably match. But if you are using a different distribution, just go ahead and adjust the commands accordingly. Now, before we get started, I'm just going to make sure real quick that we have all the latest security patches. This is something that I do mention in virtually every video that has to do with security, because the concept of updating packages isn't very lengthy to account for its own video, but it is a very important thing that we definitely want to make sure that we do when we are maintaining a Linux server. We always want to be up to date. So first of all, I'm just going to run apt update. And if you are running as a normal user, you're just going to put sudo in front of that. But since I'm running as root, I don't need to do that. So basically, anytime you see me run a command, just go ahead and put sudo in front of it if you're running as a normal user. Okay, it actually tells me 127 packages can be updated, so I'm glad I checked this. And to actually install the updates, I'm just going to run apt dist upgrade, just like that. Again, use sudo if you need to. That's the last time I'll mention it. And then I'll press enter. And it's going to, like I mentioned, upgrade 127 packages, which will require 5 newly installed packages. I'll press enter to accept the default, the capital Y for yes. And I'll let this install. If we see a message like this, we can simply say yes if we don't mind restarting services. If you are running a production server and restarting services would be bad, your users would be disconnected, then go ahead and say no, but I'm going to go ahead and say yes. Okay, so all of the updates were successfully installed. And this part is optional. We could do some cleanup. Now on a production server, you might want to reboot the server and kind of just see how things go before you do this. But since this is a brand new server, I'm just going to go ahead and do the cleanup now. So I'm just going to run apt auto remove. And it's going to go ahead and clean up old kernels. Again, if this is a production server, you might want to test out the new kernel first, but I don't care. This is a brand new instance. I'm just going to go ahead and do the cleanup now. And we're good to go. So at this point, I'm going to reboot the server. Now, it's not always necessary to reboot a Linux server, to be honest. It's just the easiest thing to do at this point. If you're running security updates on a production server, you definitely want to make sure you restart the services that have been updated. But for the sake of simplicity, I'm just going to reboot the entire server so that we are on the latest kernel and the latest software stack. So I will be right back when that's done. All right, so I think enough time has passed. I'm just going to press the up arrow and attempt to reconnect to the server. All right, put in the password. And now I am reconnected to our Linux server. So with that out of the way, it's time to actually get started on the main topic of this video. Let's get Fail2ban installed. And this part is easy. We just simply do apt install Fail2ban, just like that. And then it's going to need some additional libraries and prerequisite packages to be installed. That's fine. I'll press enter. And there we go. That was fairly quick. I didn't even have to edit that part of the video. Now, if you're not using Debian or Ubuntu, then you might need to use something other than apt install, perhaps DNF install in the case of Fedora, or pacman-S if you're running Arch Linux. But regardless, we just want to get that package installed, and then we'll move on to the next step. Next, we're going to want to see whether or not Fail2ban is running. This may vary, whether or not it starts automatically. So what we're going to do is do systemctl status Fail2ban and press enter. Now I didn't use sudo because I'm running as root. If you're running as a normal user, you may or may not see all of the information here. But in my case, we can see that it is active and running. We'll get back to the video in just a moment, but I wanted to take a minute to mention my sponsor and cloud infrastructure provider, Linode. Linode provides virtual servers that make it easy and affordable to host your own app, site, or project in the cloud. Whether you're a Linux power user or just a beginner, you can use Linode. You can start from scratch and fully customize your server for any application, or use Linode's one-click apps to deploy game servers, WordPress sites, personal VPNs, and much more. You can even upload and run your own image. Linode comes with amazing 100% human 24/7 customer support by phone or support ticket, along with hundreds of docs and guides to help you get started. Sign up to get $20 free on your new Linode account with the code LearnLinux19 or by signing up with the link in the description. I really appreciate Linode's sponsorship of my channel. They're awesome. Definitely check them out. Now let's get back to the video. But what exactly is Fail2ban doing for us? Well, there's a very specific command we can run that's going to give us that information. So what I'm going to do is run Fail2ban-client and then status and you will need to have root privileges to do this. And it tells us that there is one jail in use, and the jail that is currently in use is SSHD. But what exactly does that mean? So you might be wondering, what is Fail2ban doing for us? What is the purpose of Fail2ban in general? Probably something I should have gone over near the beginning of the video, but basically what it's going to do is it's going to monitor for login attempts, and when a certain threshold of failed logins is reached, it's going to ban that particular person by just putting in a firewall rule to block their IP. We can configure how many login attempts is allowed before it blocks somebody, and we can also configure how long someone is blocked for. Let's face it, some of our users, they're going to type in the wrong password, and I'm talking about users that legitimately should be using the server. So you might decide you don't want to basically have them blocked forever, but putting a time limit on it would probably help stop somebody trying to brute force the server if they're locked out for 30 minutes to an hour every fourth password attempt. It's a lot harder to brute force a server in that way, but it still allows the timeout to expire so that a user can try again after they have you reset their password. Now, of course, in everything that I just said, I'm referring to SSH, because as you saw, the jail that is active is SSH. So by default, Fail2ban is actually monitoring SSH for us. We didn't tell it to do that. It's automatically doing that. So it's already helping us secure SSH. But we do need to look at the configuration file to basically tweak this. And another thing to know is that Fail2ban is able to watch other types of things for login attempts. For example, Apache web logins. So SSH isn't the only thing that we can put it in front of. It's just the default, at least in terms of Ubuntu. Now again, we see that it is monitoring SSH for us, and this may vary from one distribution to another. Again, I haven't changed anything. This is Ubuntu 18.04. So how do we configure it? So what we're going to do is change directory into /etc Fail2ban, that directory right there, and let's see what's inside. We have a number of files here, but there's one in particular that's important to us, and it's this one right here, which is the configuration file that Fail2ban reads when it starts. Now, what's kind of confusing is that this is not the preferred file. There's actually another file name that it looks for that is not present here called jail.local. So I'm going to want to explain this so I don't have you waste your time configuring the wrong file. If you did make your changes in the jail.conf file, that one, it would work. I mean, all your configuration changes, assuming you had no syntax errors, would actually work just fine. You would get the desired result. But what would happen potentially is if you run your security updates and Fail2ban is updated, that jail.conf file could be overwritten and you might lose your changes, which is the reason why we don't want to use that one. But what we can do is copy that existing file to a new name, jail.local. If that file is present, Fail2ban will prefer that file, and it will not overwrite that file in case of an update. So that is the desired way to go. We definitely want to do it that way. So we want a custom file rather than use the default. And to get that started, it's pretty simple. We're just going to copy jail.conf to jail.local, and I'll press enter. And now we can see that we have the jail.local file, which is simply just a copy of the original. Again, this file will not be overwritten when we do updates, but this file right here might be overwritten if we update the package. It's just a safe rule of thumb to put our changes in this file. But let's go ahead and take a look at this. I use Vim. You can use whatever text editor you would like, and I'm going to bring that up in a text editor. And we can see that it actually is a very large file. If I turn on line numbers, for example, just colon set space number, and then I just do a capital G, it takes me to the end of the file. We see that there are 889 lines of text here, obviously a bunch of blank lines, but it's quite a big file. But I'll press G twice to jump back to the top. And don't let that scare you, because you don't have to memorize everything here. There's just a ton of examples that it gives you, but you're not going to use most of this file. The majority of the file is just used as an example that you can use to build your configurations on. Okay, so I'm going to scroll down here. And here we see line number 54. I'll just move that up a little bit. Ignore IP. So it's probably self-explanatory, but what this allows us to do is add an IP address here that will never be blocked regardless of how many invalid attempts to log in happens to come from that IP. We first have to uncomment that. Then we can move to the end of this line. Since I'm using Vim, I'm just going to go to append mode by pressing A. And then I can type an IP address right here that will never be blocked. So what you can do on your end is go to something like whatismyipaddress.com if you don't already know what your public IP is, and then you can get that number. Now, once you have that, you can go ahead and add that right here. So I'm not going to know what IP address you should put here, obviously, because each of you are going to have your own public IP. But when you go to a site like whatismyipaddress.com or equivalent, you'll just go ahead and put in whatever that number is right here. So basically, as an example, I'm just putting in a completely random IP address I just made off the top of my head. I know that's not a publicly routable IP. You get the idea. There's 4 octets. Whatever your IP address is, you'll put here. You'll make sure that there is a space between the last item and the IP address that you are entering here. And of course, you could enter more than one if you'd like. Now, in my case, I'm going to undo this change only because this is a completely bogus IP, and for the purposes of this tutorial, this really doesn't apply to me. So since this is Vim, I can hit escape and press U a couple of times to revert back to the way it was. But there's more changes that we will need to make. Ban time is an important setting to configure as well. In this case, it's defaulting to 10 minutes, despite the fact that it says right here that it's referring to the number of seconds. If you don't put the M there, that would just be for 10 seconds. That would be fairly useless. But we can see here that if a host gets banned, they will be banned for about 10 minutes. You can customize this for whatever you would like. And then you could just set it to 60 minutes, 15 minutes, you could put hours in there, whatever you would like to do. Down here is max retry, which is another setting that I recommend you consider changing. It's defaulting to 5 on this installation of Fail2ban, which means that if somebody goes beyond this, the host will be banned. And I can't tell you what to put here because it kind of depends on your situation. If you are an administrator and you have a lot of clumsy users and you set this to 5, you're going to be getting a lot of calls from people that are just simply mistyping their password. But you can increase this to 10 or to 7. You could be even more strict and lower it down to 3. As an administrator, that's basically up to you how strict you want to be here. But I just want you to know that this option exists and you can configure this accordingly. Now, all of that is well and good, but the benefit of Fail2ban is, of course, banning things. And by default, we are banning SSH, which is great because that's a very common means by which people will try to get into your server. Now, another section that I want to show you, and perhaps the most important section of this file, is the jails section. So basically, you're going to page down and look for that part of the file. In my case, it starts around line 230 in my example here, again, that could vary, but this is the jails section, which basically, as you can see, goes on for quite a while. We have all these different configurations. So basically, every time you see something in brackets like you do right here, that's basically the name of a jail or an application that Fail2ban is able to monitor by default, that has default configuration. And there's quite a few, because again, this file goes on for quite a while. So the very first thing that we have, let me go ahead and center this a bit, is SSHD. So again, when you see the brackets, that's the beginning of a new section. And basically everything underneath that stanza right here is going to be configuration for that particular object. In this case, SSHD is enabled. Now I can minimize this text file by doing Control-Z, which will take me back to the local shell here. If I do Fail2ban client status, we can see that the SSH jail is currently enabled. Now, at least in the case of Debian and Ubuntu, this is kind of an exception. We didn't actually enable this. You don't even see an option that says enabled here at all, but by default, at least in this particular distribution, that is enabled, which is why you see it, even though it doesn't reference that in the file. Now, essentially how you enable something is you add the line enabled equals true, save the file, and then what you're going to do is restart Fail2ban. And then we'll check the client status. And then you'll see whatever it is you've enabled on this list. Now, SSH was already there, so we didn't actually have to do that. Now, in other distributions, I've seen this be the case where this line is there, and maybe it's commented out, or it'll say enabled equals false, and you'll just have to change it. But in the case of Ubuntu, you'll have a blank line. It doesn't even have to be on the blank line. You can basically add it wherever, and you can simply enable that. Now, another option here that's of special importance is port. Right now, it's set to SSH. The default port for SSH is 22. So by having the word SSH here, we are basically referring to the SSH port of 22. If we have changed that port, we will need to make sure we reference that change here. Otherwise, Fail2ban will not be helping us out. In my Securing OpenSSH video that I did previously, I showed you guys how to change the port for the SSH server. If you have done that, you'll want to make that change right here. So I can go ahead and back this out right here, and I can just go ahead and type the port, whatever I happen to have SSH set to. I did not change the SSH port. I'm just giving you an example. I'm going to go ahead and change it back. But basically what you would do is write the change and then restart the file. If you're curious what I'm talking about, if you go into etc SSH and you open up the SSHD config file, near the top right here you have port 22. It's commented out, so that means it's a default. So if you were to uncomment this and change the port number to something else and then restart the SSH server, then SSH will be listening for connections on a different port. I'm not going to do that though. I'm going to go ahead and just leave it as the default. In fact, I'm just going to undo everything altogether and get out of this file. Anyway, just wanted to make sure you were aware of that. If your service is running on a different port, you do need to change that in the file. But what I'm going to do is show you guys how to change other things. Now, you might be tempted to go ahead and enable everything because, I mean, look at this. There's a bunch of things here that you can enable, and you might be thinking, you know, I want all the protections that this service offers me. I want to turn on everything by enabling everything. Don't do that because you could actually create a situation where Fail2ban isn't working at all. Now, sometimes it handles this gracefully and sometimes not. So for example, I'm going to enable this one just as a completely random example. So I'm going to do enabled equals true for this. Save the file. And let's just restart Fail2ban and see what happens. And we'll do a status on it. And it failed. Why did it fail? Well, if you remember, I enabled Apache bot search right here by adding the enabled line, but the problem is Apache is simply not installed on this server. So if you do enable something for a service that you don't even have installed in the first place, Fail2ban could fail to start up, and that's bad because it's not protecting you at all. So you definitely don't want to enable everything. So I'm going to go ahead and remove this line right here. Then I'll save it. Let's restart this service one more time. And check the status. And we're back up and running. Now it's active and running. So that's why I wanted to bring to your attention that you should not enable everything just because you can. Now I'm going to scroll up a bit here. And I'm going to explain to you the basic workflow of Fail2ban, how you would actually use this in practice. As I mentioned, it protects SSH by default. That's great, but if you have other things on your server that you want to protect, you're going to want to try to see if Fail2ban can offer you an additional layer of protection for that service. Now, as I mentioned, I was not able to enable the Apache jail, the other one I tried to enable because Apache is not installed. Let's go ahead and install it. So I'm going to do apt install Apache 2, which is probably going to be HTTPD if you're running a Fedora based or CentOS or something Red Hat like. I'll install this package. And now we have Apache installed. So I'll do systemctl status Apache 2. And we can see that it is running. And perhaps even more interesting, I have a web browser down here in a different workspace. I'm just going to paste the IP address in here. And we can see that Apache is installed. I'm successfully hosting a site on this particular cloud server. Back here on my shell, I can bring back my text editor, and let's go ahead and enable this. Even though I'm not actually accepting authentication via Apache, it's only listening on ports designated for a web server anyway, so I'm just going to go ahead and enable this. So basically the workflow is you have something running on your server, whatever that happens to be, whether it be Nginx, Apache, or something else, you're going to add this enabled line to it. Then you'll save the file and restart Fail2ban. And then after you do that, you're going to check the status of it. Make sure that it's running. And then you'll do Fail2ban client status to see if the newly enabled jail is on the list. That's how you know that Fail2ban is actually watching that service. And then what you're going to do is do this one by one. So here we have Apache bad bots. I'll go ahead and enable that as well. Save the file, and I'm just going to go through the same exact exercise all over again. It's still running, that's great. And now the newly added jail is there. So basically you just repeat for however many things in this file actually pertain to things running on your server to go ahead and help protect those items. Clear the screen. Now for the next thing I want to show you, I'm going to have to lower my font size down a bit. I try to keep it up for those of my viewers that are vision impaired, for example, but I do need to lower the font size for this in particular. And let's take a look at a very special log file. I'm just going to use cat. And you do need to be root or have sudo in order to be able to look at this file. we can see that there are, there's quite a few things in here. I mean, obviously I was testing and playing around with this before I recorded the video, but if I scroll up a bit, I'm hoping we will see some kind of line where somebody was banned, like somebody's trying to log into my server and they weren't able to. And so far we don't have anybody here trying to break in, but basically I wanted to show you guys what log file you can look into to find some information about what is going on with Fail2ban. Now, other log files that you might want to take a look at from time to time: the system log. We can see some items here where basically Fail2ban logs some of its information there as well. And then we also have the authorization log, which is already on your server and might be var log secure for other distributions, but basically in my case var log auth.log, which will also have some useful information that you might want to check out if you're in a situation where you want to know if something got banned or if somebody is getting locked out. Now, one easier way of getting some information is you can actually perform a status lookup on individual jails. Now again, we've been running this, which basically tells us that there are 3 jails enabled, and then it lists them down here. But what you can also do is type the name of one of the jails, and it's going to actually give you a list of banned IPs, which you can see right here. Thankfully, no one has tried to hack into the server yet, but considering this is a test server, I kind of wish somebody was. But right now we have nobody banned following this right here. So what do you do in a situation where you want to unban an IP address? Maybe your user entered their password in incorrectly too many times, and honest mistake, you want to basically unban them. How would you do that? Well, the first thing you would do, again, is execute this command right here. We've already done that. Whatever the jail name is, if it's not SSH, they're locked out of something else, you would put that jail name there. You would confirm that their IP address is on this list, just to make sure that Fail2ban actually is the culprit in why they can't reach the server. And if their IP address is listed here, we can use the same Fail2ban client to unban their IP as well. So to do that, we'll do Fail2ban client set, then the name of the jail we are trying to configure. So in this case, let's just assume it's SSH. Then we're going to use the argument unban IP, because we do want to unban an IP. And then we type the IP address right here. And I just made up a completely random number just to give you an idea. Now I pressed enter and it's telling me that IP is not banned. But if that was a actual IP that was banned from Fail2ban, we would be able to unban them with this command. And just to show you guys, I'm going to try to simulate this problem right now. So I'm going to open a new tab, and I'm going to SSH into my cloud server here. And let's have a little fun. It's asking me for the password. I'm just going to put something incorrect into this. Again, just putting in gibberish for the password. Random characters again. And permission denied. And just to be safe, I'm going to just keep trying. Okay, permission denied. I think I have tried enough times. Now, I am still connected here, thankfully. I did not add my IP to the actual whitelist, but what I want to do now is see how this affected Fail2ban. So I'll do Fail2ban client status SSHD. Currently failed 1, total failed 4. Now, I'm not banned quite yet, so maybe I should just go ahead and try this a few more times and just go crazy. Let's see what it's going to take here. Now, at this point, I can't even type anything. I am locked out of the server. Even though I had an established connection here, that connection got dropped because it basically added a firewall rule to lock me out because I kept trying to get into the server and I wasn't able to do that. So when this happens, I need a backdoor into the server. Now, if you did add your IP address as a whitelist, you would not get locked out. But I omitted that on purpose. So let's go ahead and try to get into the server another way. Now here on my Linode account, I can just click Launch Console right here, which is going to bring up a console window. And what this is going to do is allow me to log into the server. I apologize for the small text here. But basically, I'm just logging in as root again. And now I am logged in. So what I can do now is just double check. Fail2ban client, status SSH, D, enter. And it does say that I am banned and it gives me the banned IP right here. So what I'm going to do is restore my access. So what I'm going to do is run Fail2ban client, set SSHD, Unban IP, and then that IP address. Press enter, and it just repeated the IP address that I typed in, which I'm going to take that to mean it's a confirmation. Let's see. And look at this. I'm basically already connected. I didn't wait long enough for my SSH connection to basically time out and drop. As soon as I unbanned the IP address, it basically allowed me right back in. It just allowed me to resume the session that I already had open. Now, for the more technical people watching this, if you're curious, where is the firewall rules? I've mentioned firewall a few times here, haven't I? So if I was to do IP tables -L, again as root or with sudo, now I'm not going to see it now because I unbanned my IP, but you should actually see your banned IPs in here. But we see that we have a chain right here for Fail2ban, and that's for SSHD. And you can see that Fail2ban is basically modifying the firewall. That's how it actually changes and enforces its rules, by configuring the Linux IP tables firewall whenever there's an event that requires it to do so. But basically, that's all there is to it when it comes to the basics. So that's basically it. Now, Fail2ban can get more advanced than this. When you start to get into regular expressions and creating your own jails, that's where it gets more complex. Now, most of the time, when you want to protect something on your server, it's going to be like a web server, SSH, something typical like that. Fail2ban is going to have a jail already in the sample config file that you can use to go ahead and enable that. But if you do run into a situation where you have a service that you want to enable a jail for and there isn't one, you can Google around and see if someone has already written a jail, or you might have to run it yourself. That's beyond the scope of this video, because for the vast majority of you guys, the default jail.conf file that you later rename to jail.local, that sample file will have everything that you need inside it, and you just enable the jails that pertain to your server and what its use case is for. So hopefully that was helpful for you guys. Let me know what you think in the comments below. Again, Fail2ban is not a one-stop shop. It's just one more layer of security that you can add to your cloud server, your virtual server, or whatever kind of Linux server that you happen to have. That'll make it that much harder for someone on the outside to break in. But again, at the end of the day, the more layers of security you have on your machine, the more secure it actually is, and you should never rely on just one thing. Fail2ban just gives you one more layer. So, thanks again for watching, guys, and I will see you in the next video. Thanks for checking out my video. I really appreciate it. If you found it useful, click that like button, and if you haven't already done so, make sure you subscribe so you'll see the latest content as soon as it becomes available. If you want to help me out, there's links down below for my Patreon page, as well as links for purchasing my Linux books, and also my affiliate store, which has a listing of Linux compatible hardware that I've actually tested personally. Thanks again for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.